Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 31-year-old Mary Catherine Edwards. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first want to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. If you've been here a while, you have heard me talk about all the benefits that Aura has and all the ways that Aura helps keep you and your loved ones safe online from things like data breaches, right? And today I want to, expand on what these data breaches can actually look like. Now, the reason I want to discuss it this time around is because I recently learned that when you have your data, your personal information leaked out into the web, it can take months before you know. Months. There's one big bank that you may or may not have heard of that recently announced that they had a data breach and didn't tell anybody about it for literal months. And that's just one breach. There could be several in a year. Your personal information could literally be out in the web right now and you wouldn't know. And that's one of the ways in which Aura comes in and saves the day. Aura can alert you if your phone number, your email address, or even your social security number end up on the dark web. And if you know, no one wants their information leaked on the dark web. And they also let you know right away if any of this information has been used to access your credit or debit accounts. And that's just one of the ways that Aura helps protect you and your loved ones from online threats that you just simply cannot see. With Aura, you can identify which data brokers are exposing your information, and Aura submits opt-out requests on your behalf. You can get up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. You can get a VPN and more, and you get it all in one place. There's no need for several different apps, and you get it all at one affordable price. Now listen, it sounds like a great deal to me, but I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do. But what I can tell you is that I'm not going to leave my family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. And if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/Bratterstein to get 2 weeks for free through my link. And in case you're curious, that is enough time for Aura to find out if your personal information, if your data has been exposed. So if all that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to use my link in the description box below. It's aura.com/Bratterstein to get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal and private information has been leaked online. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. With all that said, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that is out of Beaumont, Texas, that was and presumably still is in Jefferson County. And it was here that in 1995, a beloved school teacher was murdered in her home. She was found killed in her home, her place of safety. And though it looked to police, like right off the bat, they thought this was going to be an easy case to solve, it would take nearly 30 years for her and her family to get justice. So with that, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. At the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this: do you think that Mary Catherine Edwards' murderer is responsible for any additional murders? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. After you hear all of this, I'm very curious to hear what you think. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 31-year-old Mary Catherine Edwards. So our story today is going to begin on Saturday, January 14th, 1995. And again, we are in Beaumont, Texas. But more specifically, we are at a Park Meadow Street townhome. It was on this day that a man named Loom and his wife Marianne had shown up at this townhouse that was occupied by their daughter. Basically, what had happened that day is that their daughter Allison had come over to their house in a bit of, not a panic, but she was definitely a little bit worried. And that's because she had been trying to get a hold of her sister. This was their other daughter, Catherine. Allison had called Catherine's home phone over, and it's 1995, so there's only a home phone. She had called the phone over and over and was getting no response. And this was weird because she was calling to confirm the plans they had for that day, which was a family lunch and then a trip to the movie theater. So she was like, hey, is this still going on? Even though she knew it was going on because Catherine was very routine and they did things together all the time. But she's calling over and over. She's getting no response. She's starting to go into a little bit of a panic because she's leaving. Would they be called voicemails? No. Messages on her answering machine because of the 1995 of it all. And Catherine was very good at checking her messages, but she hadn't called her back. She hadn't called Allison back. Now, not sure what to do, she had gone to her parents' house, to Loom and Marianne's house, where they sat together and tried to come up with explanations for Catherine's absence, right? They thought maybe she was at church. Catherine was very involved with her church, so they thought it was possible that she was at St. Andrew's. But as the time ticked by, Loom started to get nervous. So he got Catherine's house key from her sister Allison. Allison had a spare key, and he and his wife decided to drive over to Catherine's house and just check things out a little bit. So Loom and Marianne drove over to Catherine's townhome. And when they entered this house, they stumbled upon something that I truly cannot imagine finding anyone, let alone your child, in this condition. Catherine was inside her bathroom. Her hands were handcuffed behind her back. She was nude from the waist down, and she was dead. She was slumped over the bathtub with her head submerged in a couple of inches of water. Immediately upon discovering Catherine, Marianne called 911 in hysterics to tell them that her daughter had been murdered. Her child had been murdered. And not just that, she told the operator that her daughter had been handcuffed and tortured. And her daughter was Mary Catherine Edwards. Mary Catherine Edwards, named for her mother Mary, but who went by Catherine, was one of two girls born on July 9th, 1963, to parents Loom and Marianne. And when I said one of two girls born on, I didn't mean that Catherine only had sisters, right? She did have a brother. She had a little brother, I believe, named Loom Jr. What I meant is that Mary Catherine Edwards was actually a twin. She was an identical twin. She had a reflection in herself with her twin sister, Allison. In true twin fashion, the sisters were very close. They were obviously close in age, being twins and born on the same day and all. And they looked exactly the same because they were identical. They had these large brown eyes and these infectious smiles, and they looked so much alike that they were very easily able to trick people and pretend to be the other one. They even had, in their yearbook, they had photos of them that were labeled incorrectly. They're like, oh, this is Mary Catherine. It wasn't. It was Allison, and vice versa. Now, Catherine's entire family was very close, but the bond between her and her sister Allison was unmatched. Everything about them, you'll see as I talk about it, they were so similar. And they had even lived together in the townhome where Catherine would eventually be found killed until 1991 when Allison moved out because she got married. And I mentioned that they had so much in common with the way that they looked, the way that they acted, the things they were interested in. They even had a similar life path, and both sisters, both twins, went on to be teachers. Catherine's dream in life was to be a teacher, and she had followed that dream. She said that she knew it was her life's calling. It was just what she was meant to do. And she was clearly very good at what she did because decades later, decades after she had affected a child's life, one of her students from when she was alive actually came and was present all through her murder trial. For context, I guess at the time that Catherine was this girl's teacher, her parents had been going through a divorce, and Catherine was there for her and instrumental in helping her get through that. And even though this girl ended up being transferred out of Catherine's class because she was put in the gifted and talented program at the school, she would make sure almost every day to go back and visit her favorite teacher while she was on her lunch. And I mean, even years later, clearly Catherine really impacted her. She just said that Catherine was wonderful. She said Catherine never had any of her own children, so she treated her students like they were her kids. She treated this girl like she was her mother. Catherine was said to be the type of teacher who never raised her voice, who greeted her kids every day with a hug, the type of teacher who would go out of her way and use her own money to buy the kids snacks and things for homeroom parties, and the type of teacher who just lit up these kids' days with her smile. She just had this warm, welcoming presence to her that they still remember to this day. It's insane. At the time she was killed, Catherine taught at Price Elementary School in Beaumont's Pear Orchard neighborhood, and her sister Allison worked in the same district, but at Amelia Elementary. And Catherine got into a habit whenever she would start like a school year with new kids. She would let all the kids know that she had a twin so that they knew that if they were out in public or out around the campus, well, it wouldn't have been the campus because of, they worked at different schools, in public, and they were to see her and she didn't react to them or seem excited to see them, not to be worried and not to feel sad that it wasn't her, it was probably just her sister. And I guess Allison would tell her students the same way, but despite giving these messages to the kids, both women got accustomed to like random strange kids just running up and hugging them throughout their like lives. The principal where she worked said that Catherine put her entire heart into her job. They said that Catherine was never the type of teacher who like was very quick to leave the campus when the school day was over. She was just like a safe space for her kids. She just sounded like such a good person, such a good teacher. She called her students her kids and she talked about them all the time. Catherine was described as a, quote, little gal with a big heart because she was less than 5 feet tall. And she was said to be very loving, very trusting, somebody who saw the best in people to the point that she may have been a little naive. And her sister said of this quote, she would walk her dog alone at night or go sit outside alone and read. And I'd tell her that's not a good idea, but she just loved nature and was very trusting. Catherine was a very sweet, very giving Christian woman. She went to Wednesday night Bible study at the church. She went to singles night at her Baptist church, and she had really devoted her life to God. A month before she was murdered on December 11th, she wrote in her journal of this, and I quote, "I've given my life to God, and I will follow his path for me. This gives me a feeling of great relief and peace. The human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it." So Catherine was a good woman who had a very chill life. Her entire world revolved around her family, her kids, her beagle named Maggie, and the Lord. So why would somebody come into her home and kill her so brutally? So for police to answer that question, they needed to look into Catherine's life, right? Especially in the hours leading up to her murder to see if anything weird had happened, if she had encountered anybody strange. But in talking to her friends and family, they found that there was really nothing out of the norm that had happened. The Friday before she was killed was like any other Friday. She had gotten up for work. She had driven her dog Maggie over to her sister Allison's house to leave her there while she worked. She went to work, she stayed after and completed her lesson plan, and then at about 4 p.m., she went back to Allison's house to pick up Maggie and socialize a little bit with her sister. She stayed at the house for a little bit, saw the new little baby before getting her dog and leaving. She stopped on the way home. She got some Italian food. She went home. She did some Bible study. She drank some wine. She walked her dog, and she went to bed. The last time anyone talked to her was her sister Allison, and it was that Friday night at about 8 p.m. And then from there, we know what happened. Allison and Catherine had plans. Allison tried to get a hold of her that Saturday, couldn't get a hold of her, went to her parents' house, told them what happened, and they went over to Catherine's townhome and found her murdered. And dude, I can't even imagine being Allison in this situation because she goes to her parents' house and then she stays there while they go to check on Catherine. I'm not exactly sure why that was, maybe in case Catherine was to call or to come over. That part I'm not quite sure about, but she's waiting there while her parents leave and she has no idea what's going on. And I guess they were gone such a long time that eventually she started calling Catherine's phone again over and over. And eventually someone else picked up the phone. And that's how she found out what happened. And she said of this, quote, "I called over there and my dad answered her phone and said, 'Your sister's dead.' I called 911 and then I called my brother and we all cried and cried. It was horrible. They were never the same, and I think they died a little bit too when she did. I was cheated. It's not fair." And she's right. She's absolutely right. It's not fair. So many people lost so much when Catherine was killed. This case was shocking. It made no sense for this young, beautiful teacher to be killed in her house. She was a great person. She was from a great family. And she was killed in her own home, a place where statistically she should have been the safest. I feel very strongly that I have read something once that said that the safest you can be is to be a married person because you stay in the house all the time. I'm fairly certain that I read that somewhere, but then you think about all the husbands that are killing their wives and all the wives that are killing their husbands. But supposedly, statistically, you're safest in your home, and married people are always in their home. So the point is, even though she wasn't married, she was home. So statistically, she should have been safe. It just didn't make sense to police how this could happen. And it didn't make sense to her neighbors how this could happen either, because they knew her as this sweet, kind woman who was very routine. She was the type of person that they saw all the time at the same times every day. She'd walk her dog, come home from work. Everything was like by the number, paid by numbers, but like routine wise. A quiet, routine teacher that people loved, that her kids loved, dude. So in the aftermath of her murder, there were counselors brought into the school to help the staff and to help the kids, because this is such a traumatizing thing to happen during such formative years. And it had to be super strange too in that town, because they could still see Catherine walking around town whenever they would see her twin sister, Allison. I can't even imagine what that would be like. And all of that is just to say that Catherine was incredibly important to this community, so the police felt particularly motivated to get this case solved. So police begin policing, and they start taking in the scene. They go into the home, obviously, and they can see that there's clearly a sign of a struggle, because in addition to Catherine being slumped over the tub, the shower curtain had been, like the bar, had been knocked off the mount. The curtain was laying askew in the bedroom. Her comforter had been like ripped off her bed. And then you take that in combination with the fact that she was nude from the waist down, it really painted a picture of what happened here. And that was that she had been sexually assaulted. They were able to tell that by examining her. And the pathologist could tell that she had received quite a beating, because she had over 30 injuries to her body. Initially, it was believed that her cause of death was drowning. This is how they reported it in the newspapers, initially with headlines like, quote, "Beaumont teacher drowned in bathtub." And, that's because she was found in a bathtub and her head was submerged in a couple of inches of water. So that seemed like a pretty plausible explanation for what happened to her. But in addition to that, that was the pathologist's initial determination as well. But later, when reviewing the case with more education, he said that when he checked her lungs, they found that there was actually not enough water in her lungs for the cause of death to be drowning. So they ruled that out and realized she was actually killed due to the weight of somebody like compressing her diaphragm, and that's what caused her death. So Catherine went through hell, and because of the nature of how she was killed and the fact that she was assaulted, there was DNA. There was DNA on and in Catherine, and there was also DNA on her bed sheets. But the problem is the 1995 of it all. DNA just simply was not as advanced as it is now. So all they could really do with that profile that they had was preserve it as best as they could and hope and pray and wait for science to catch up with them. And eventually it would, but we will get there. Since they couldn't really use that profile at the time, in addition to taking in the scene, they were also doing, old-fashioned boots to the ground, footwork, police work, doing it. So in canvassing the area, they were able to actually put together a timeline of when Catherine when they believe Catherine was murdered. And this came from her neighbors in the townhouse next to her. This was Merle and his wife, Deborah, I believe. And they actually, because they were neighbors right next to each other, they shared a wall, and it was like their closet walls. Their closet wall in their bedroom was also Catherine's wall, right? So they'd be able to hear things, is what I'm getting at. And hear things they did. The night that Catherine was murdered, Merle and Deborah and their child, this was a boy, were woken up between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning to the sound of thumping being hit against, thumping on the wall that was shared with Catherine's unit, right? They said that it sounded like somebody was kicking the wall over and over, but because it was just the sound of thumping and there was no accompanying like cries or screams or anything like that that would let them think that something terrible was happening, once it stopped, they put it out of their minds and they just went back to bed. At least the couple did. Their son, he was 12 years old and his name was Matthew. He didn't go right back to bed. He had woken up to the sound of the thumping and he thought that somebody was banging on the wall. So he was like sitting up and like listening and stuff. And after that, after the thumping stopped, he heard the sound of somebody coming downstairs, leaving the house, getting into a car, the sound of loud music, and then saw the headlights from like a car shine into his room before driving away. And later, as an adult, he has a lot of guilt around this. And he told police of this, quote, "It's something I've held with me my whole life. I wish I would have got up and beat on that door or something." And, it sucks that he feels that way because he was a child. There's really nothing that he could have done. There's really nothing anybody could do now except for police to try to figure out who did this so that they could put him in jail and ensure that they never had the opportunity to do this to anybody else ever again. So let's get into that. Now, when police were looking into this case, they thought it was going to be an easy solve because they didn't have a lot of avenues to go down. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't know a ton of people. She didn't have a complicated life. Her whole life was school, the church, the gym, a boyfriend she had. And literally when they looked at her, they were like, there's no way that this woman is real. Nobody could be that pure, that nice. But she just was. Unfortunately, though, they were wrong. And even though it seemed like it was going to be an easy case to solve because there weren't a lot of avenues to go down, every road they went down just led to a dead end. Now, one of the first avenues that they went down that led to these dead ends, to one of the dead ends, was looking into men that were in Catherine's life, which led them to an ex-boyfriend named David. Now, the reason they were looking into men that knew her specifically, well, one, duh, and two, there didn't seem to be any sign of forced entry. So they thought it was possible that whoever did this to her, Catherine actually let into her home. Now, the reason they had ended up looking at David specifically is because him and Catherine were said to have a very heated on-again, off-again relationship, and that they had even recently gotten some sort of heated argument. But when they talked to Catherine's family, people who knew them as a couple, they all across the board said that David was not a violent guy. And on top of that, shortly before she was killed, they had decided to break off their relationship for good, which to me sounds like motive. Sounds like something that we hear about before a man does kill a woman that he loves or loved or says that he loves, but really is just obsessed with. But David did have an alibi. He was out of town at the time that Catherine was killed, and they were able to actually exclude him from the suspect pool through his DNA because they had DNA, so they were able to test it against people, but only people that they had DNA for, right? Because they didn't have a database like they do now. So they could test it against him, and he wasn't a match. So not really having anybody specific in Catherine's life that they could look at, they went with the one kind of solid piece of evidence that they had, and this was the handcuffs, because you remember I said that Catherine was handcuffed behind her back. She had her hands handcuffed behind her back when she was found killed. Now, these weren't toy handcuffs. They weren't the type you would get at a sex shop or anything like that. They were legit handcuffs. So they were oh, we are going to be able to trace these to somebody. They even looked at the serial number on the handcuffs, but everything they looked into came up empty. And this was super frustrating. This one thing was something that drove investigators crazy because they're with these handcuffs, we should be able to narrow this down to somebody. There has to be somebody in her life that would who would occupy a role of someone who would need handcuffs, whether it be a cop or a security guard. But no, it never went anywhere. The detectives checked through the sex offenders registries, looked at men associated with her gym, talked to members of her church. They looked into other similar cases in the area, but found nothing. And within no time, Catherine's murder case went cold. And that didn't mean that the case wasn't worked on, because it was. Over the years, they continued to refer back to Catherine's case. They continued to take the DNA that was found at the scene and test it against people that they thought were persons of interest or possible suspects. But each time it just came back as not a match. And they were saying that they were hopeful. They were hopeful that eventually one day they would be able to solve it, because though they just hadn't found the right person yet, there were more and more people who were putting their DNA into DNA databases. Every year that goes by, more and more people submit their DNA. At one point, it was in 1996, they thought they were onto something. They thought that perhaps Catherine had been killed by a serial killer, because there were 2 more murders that happened in Arlington, which I don't know how close that is to Beaumont, but it couldn't have been too far. But in Arlington, where 2 more women were killed, both of them were educators, and they were both found in bathtubs. So they were like, oh my God, maybe there's a serial killer that also killed Catherine. But unfortunately, after police visited this area and actually reviewed the evidence, they said, quote, the physical evidence in the Arlington cases does not match what Beaumont police have found in investigating Edward's death, Catherine's death. I don't like when they just use last names. I don't know why. That's why I never do it. I don't know if you've noticed this. It always just feels so impersonal and just off to me. But they're basically these cases don't match. So the case was stalled. People were restless. The police were restless. This became their biggest unsolved case. And this case just had people on edge because of the brutality of the case, but also the fact that police just couldn't seem to solve it. Like, not being able to solve a case in a cold case for such a long time will automatically bring some rumors bubbling to the surface. But then you take the fact that they can't solve it and you add the handcuffs of it all to it. And people started to wonder if perhaps the person who did this was a cop. And that's why the police weren't able to solve this case. And this was, of course, speculation that police simply did not need to have out there and did not want to have out there. And, though that was the rumor that maybe a cop did it, maybe that's why they can't solve it. If you were actually to look at the case and look at the investigation, it did seem like they were doing everything in their capability to solve the case. Like, they didn't even keep it local. There were several agencies involved in the investigation, from the Beaumont Police to the Texas Rangers to the FBI. And that would be a whole lot of collusion if there was actually a cover-up happening here, like collusion. Anyways, work was done on the case over the years. Money was spent. Money was offered up as an award. It started as a $3,000 award and ended up being raised to a $6,000 award. And unfortunately, they were not getting any answers. But Catherine was never forgotten. When a new Beaumont police chief was sworn in to take over the police department, because he's the chief, right? One of the first things he did is he assigned a cold case unit to Catherine's case. He wanted it solved. He wanted to get a fresh pairs of eyes looking at everything they had. So they were poring over boxes and boxes and boxes of evidence. And what they came down to was that the answer lied in the DNA, man. The answer lied in the DNA. So still, even with all these new eyes on it, which actually, real quick, when you find out who did it, it seems like perhaps this person should have been somewhere in these files. I will say that. We'll get to it when we find out who it was. But in looking at it, they were like, we really just need technology to catch up with us. And eventually it did. So I'm sure all of us know this, but in 2018, a new type of technology became the topic of conversation when it was used to help catch the Golden State Killer, a case I covered many a moon ago. One of the very first cases I covered on this channel, which means I should probably redo it because it probably wasn't very good. But it was genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy, baby. Okay, so if you don't know what this is, the simplest way I can describe it with my limited brain is that cops take the DNA of their killer, they put it into a site, and then through science, they're able to create a family tree of people who would be related to the person whose DNA they had submitted, the killers, and they do this from DNA profiles that have been uploaded to like ancestry sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, things like that. From there, once the family tree has grown from the little seedling that it started as, police start looking at the people that are part of this family tree and see if anyone on this family tree knew the victim, in this case, Catherine. If from there somebody seems like they're going to be a good suspect, they go to this person, they find them, they track them down, they go to this person and they try to retrieve their DNA to test against the DNA that they submitted to build this family tree. So basically what it does is it takes the suspect pool from any man on earth, right? Because you have no idea, and narrows it down to one specific family. I feel like I explained that pretty good. Did you hear that? I don't know if you guys will have heard that, but I feel like I described it pretty good. And it was like my child was laughing at me, saying that no, I did not. And if you didn't hear him laugh, then this makes no sense. But continuing on. So in April of 2020, the DNA from Catherine's murder case was sent to a forensic lab. This was Othram outside of Houston. They sent it there so they could have the DNA put in and have this family tree created. And this was very helpful because they were able to narrow it down to a family that had roots in Louisiana, and they were Caucasian. From there, they tried cross-referencing Catherine's journal with the names that were on this family tree to see if maybe any first names, any last names, anything popped up. But it was a dead end. And this was a problem because though they had narrowed down their list from like any guy in the world to a specific family tree, there were still like 7,000 dudes in this family tree that they needed to sort through to figure out which one could be the person who killed Catherine. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. They're looking at this family tree. They're looking at like the genetic profiles that were submitted, the family trees being built. And there's one particular name that keeps popping up, a last name, and it's Lapointe. Lapointe, baby, Lapointe. And basically what it meant is that somebody with the last name Lapointe, in this case it was Shara LaPointe was building out this family tree herself, which meant that Shara LaPointe was somehow related distantly or not so distantly to their killer. So the detective working this case, he had a wife. The wife's name is Tina. She also works in law enforcement. I think she was an auto crimes detective, but in her off time, she was helping her husband look into this case. She wanted to be part of the cold case investigation, so she's helping. And she's the one who sees that in the family tree that Shara LaPointe is like doing shit in there. And she sees the name coming up and she's like, okay, let's look in to the Shara LaPointe. And what a small world. What are the odds? But Shara is known professionally as the gene hunter. So basically, she is, quote, a popular lecturer and professional genealogist who has completed over 75 cases where adoptees or people of unknown parentage were reunited with their families. And she has helped solve decades-old cold cases. Most notably, she did some work on the Killing Fields murder case. I believe she identified one of the victims who had been, like, unknown. So they're like, oh, fuck yeah, this girl could be like serious. This woman, this very professional businesswoman could be of great use to us. She could be so helpful. So Tina is like, let me reach out to her. Tina reaches out to Shara and is like, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you be willing to like help us work on this? Even though that would mean you're kind of looking into somebody from your own family lineage. And Shara was like, you know what? Fuck yeah, I will. And her and Tina become this dynamic duo with like matching glasses, and they become close friends. And they have one common goal, and that's solving Catherine's murder. These two women would work through this family tree, and anytime they came upon a name that looked promising to them for one reason or another, they would reach out to Tina's husband. This was the detective. His name was Aaron. And Aaron and a guy he was working with from the Texas Rangers named Brian, I believe, would get together. They were a dynamic duo as well. They would drive to whomever the person was that was the suspect or like the person of interest from the women, and they would go and question this person, try to get their DNA and see if they would point out any of their family members that were maybe like a weirdo, which sounds like you wouldn't tell the police if you had like a weird family member, but according to them, it was pretty common for them to be like, actually, I did have like this weird uncle who da-da-da-da-da-da, and then from there, they'd have more people to look into. They did this for 3 months, sorting through this list, finding people, going to see them, testing their DNA, and just chipping down at their list. And they worked nonstop until finally they found something. They worked on this case so much over that 3-month period that if they were actually logging their overtime hours, which they weren't, and perhaps they should have been. I feel like nobody should work for free, but do what you want with your life, right? But if they had, it would have came to like $50,000. So one night, Shara working late into the night, she's doing about the list, the tree, and she comes upon a last name of Thibodeau. And she finds that there's a couple with that last name, or a couple related to that last name, who had lived in Beaumont, who had 2 sons who had actually gone to Forest Park High School, which was the same high school that Catherine went to. And they went to this high school at the same time that Catherine did. So Shara adds them to the tree, sends a text message over to Tina, letting her know what she had found, and then turns off her phone and goes to sleep. Again, she's working late. She had sent many a names before. This wasn't the first person that they thought was good to be looked at, and every other one had been a dead end. So it wasn't something that she was like overly enthusiastic about. She sends a text. She turns off her phone. She passes out on her couch, and she wakes up in the morning to Tina having absolutely blown her phone the fuck up with messages, because this was it. They had found it. One of the 2 sons who had gone to Forest Park High at the same time as Catherine was her killer. It was either Michael Foreman or Clayton Foreman. With that, they start looking into these 2 brothers, and they find that one of them is clean. He is as clean as a clean thing can be. Cool. But the other brother, he has a record, and not a chill record either. Clayton Bernard Foreman had been arrested in 1981 after a 19-year-old woman had called police and reported that he had bound her hands and raped her. He and this girl knew each other because they both went to Forest Park High School, where Clayton was the manager of the football team. And for this, Clayton was convicted. He was convicted of this assault, but did not serve any time. Instead, he was forced to pay a fine and just have probation, which seems insane to me. If you have enough to convict a man of binding a woman's hands behind her back and raping her, put him in jail. dog. Like, put him in the jail? In the jail. What? Okay. I'm going to go on about a tangent. It's going to be a little one. What is probation? Okay. Probation is a punishment in this way. How is that a deterrent when it was already against the law to do the raping? And he did it anyway. So how's probation going to stop somebody from... Probation is a rule, but like the law wasn't good enough to make him not do it. And like the morals of being a human being wasn't enough to make him not do it. So how is probation? Am I dumb? Am I missing something? Guys are fucking crazy. Now, if you're like my age or younger, or, or think like I did, my first thought was, okay, cool, sick, DNA. He was convicted of sexual assault, so therefore his DNA should like be in a system. They could just take that, test it against the DNA from Catherine's murder scene, bing, bang, boom, figure out if it's him for sure. But no, that isn't the case, because at the time he committed this crime, the sexual assault, the DNA registry for sexual offenders didn't even exist yet. So his DNA was not in the system for them to check against. But, okay, his record is not the only thing that made him look to be a pretty good candidate for being Catherine's murderer. Okay, there was that, which is already bad. That looks real bad, especially because, like, hands behind the back, we're going to get there. But on top of that, Clayton had once married a woman named Diana, which sounds random, but just wait 1 second. And by wait 1 second, I mean, I'm going to tell you about it literally right now. Diana was someone who was good friends with both Catherine and her twin sister Allison. They had met in middle school, had stayed friends all through high school, and while in high school, Diana had met a guy, had fallen in love, had decided to marry him. And because she was such good friends with the twins, both of them were bridesmaids at her wedding. Her wedding to Clayton Foreman. So, the guy that they're looking at in connection to Catherine's murder, out of all those 7,000 people, they narrowed it down to a guy who was married to one of Catherine's closest friends. And Catherine was literally in his wedding. Insanity. And poor Diana, man, she really went through it when she found out that Clayton was being looked at in connection to what happened to Catherine, because, like, she really just did not think he was capable of doing something like this. Diana said when she met Clayton, he was like everything that she could want. He was a good guy and things moved really fast between the two of them. And when he proposed, she said yes, because she said it just felt like meant to be. It wasn't until just months before their actual wedding that she started to see red flags that she chose to ignore because he was able to explain away, basically. I mean, picture this. You're this young woman. You're super happy. You're with a guy you think is perfect. You're about to get married. The wedding invitations are sent out. And then you learn about his previous arrest and what it was for. So she goes to him and she brings it up to him in disbelief. She cannot believe that the guy she knows, the guy she loves, could be responsible for something so horrible. And he convinced her that he wasn't. He convinced her that it was a big misunderstanding. And she said of this, quote, "His story to me was that he had picked up a hitchhiker and they went to Rogers Park and they made out and he felt her up." And she said that she believed him because if he had done something so horrible, the horrible thing he was charged with, she thought that he would have been in jail if he actually did it, which you'd think, but here we fucking find ourselves. Now, when Diana's brother, sister, and parents found out about Clayton's prior arrest, they did not believe him. They did not believe it was a misunderstanding. They saw the red flags for exactly what they were. So they tried to convince Diana not to marry him. They're like, don't marry him, or at least don't marry him now. Give it a little time. Think on it. Don't jump into this. But Diana said that she was certain she wanted to marry him. He had told her that he loved her and he was so sorry she was in this position and he still wanted to be with her more than anything else in the world. So she refused to call it off. And her family knew that they needed to just accept it or they would lose her. So they did. The two got married, had a child together, a baby boy. And with time, things got bad. Clayton would lie to Diana about their finances. And if that wasn't bad enough, he also had an affair. And at that point, she was just over it. And the two divorced after being together for 11 years. Imagine being with somebody 11 years and then finding out that after you two divorced, he killed one of your friends. It's so fucked. So anyways, moving on, at the time that police realized that Clayton Foreman is the person that they should be looking at when it comes to Catherine's murder, which is why, remember when I said before, like, it seems like he should have been in their files. Like, this is the husband of one of her close friends. This is somebody whose wedding she was in. You'd think when looking at guys in her life, they would have looked at him, but whatever. When they realize now that Clayton Foreman is the person they should be looking at, they're like, dang, it's been decades. This fool's probably like 60 at this point, and he was no longer living in Beaumont, so they had to find him. Luckily, though, they were able to track him down. They were able to find out that he had graduated from Forest Park High School in 1978, and sometime after that had relocated to Reynoldsburg, which is over 1,000 miles away in Ohio. And now there, he was 61 years old, and he was working as an Uber driver and engaged. From there, investigators in Beaumont reach out to investigators in Reynoldsburg, and they're like, hey, can you please dumpster dive in Clayton's trash? Essentially, no. But they're like, can you do a trash run? Can you like go by his house, wait for him to put his trash outside, and collect said trash, because then you could take it and you could test for DNA on items that were thrown away by him against the DNA at Catherine's murder scene. So they did just that. They confiscated Clayton's trash, and inside they found things like hair, a plastic fork, some empty medicine bottles with his name on it, plastic spoon, and some dental floss. All things that could very well and did have DNA on them. Police then had these items sent to a lab in Houston for testing, and when they tested these items against the DNA in Catherine's murder case, it was a match. The odds of this DNA belonging to anyone other than Clayton Foreman was 1 in 461 septillion, which I want to know how many zeros that is. If I figured it out, it's on the screen. That's a lot of zeros. I don't think there's even that many people on Earth. So the lab contacts the detective and is like, go get him, Tiger. It is a match. So go off and get him. They did. Officers in Beaumont jumped on a plane and they flew their little asses over to Ohio to sit down with Clayton in person and see how much they could get out of him before arresting him. In the meantime, Tina, remember the detective's wife who was working with Sheriff? Okay. Tina goes over to see Diana, Clayton's ex-wife, and sits down with her and tells her about Clayton being looked at in relation to Catherine's murder. And at this point, she had zero idea that he was connected in any way. So Tina sat down with her and told her that they had a suspect that they were going to be arresting, that they had connected him to Catherine's murder through DNA, and told her that it was Clayton. And she could not believe it. She was just so shocked and kept saying, oh my God, over and over. And she said the very first thought that came to her head was Catherine's twin sister, Allison. And she said that she was worried that Allison would hate her because of what the man she married did. Diana has lived with a lot of shame over what happened and the fact that she was married to Clayton. Like, there was an episode of 48 Hours on this case that I watched, and I guess Diana took a lot of convincing to even be in this episode because she felt so ashamed. And I guess she decided to do it like just right before it was even going to air. So they like did her stuff super last minute. And she only ended up doing it after her brother and sister convinced her that like she should not be ashamed. She has nothing to be ashamed of. But she still feels it. And she feels a lot of guilt because she thinks that when she thinks about what happened and she thinks about Clayton going to Catherine's door, she thinks the only thing Clayton could have used to his advantage to get in that door was something to do with her. Because Catherine and Clayton weren't like buds. Catherine was buds with Diana. Diana was married to Clayton. So she has this guilt and she feels like if she had never met Clayton and never married Clayton, then Catherine would not have even had him in her life. Like he would have no knowledge of her existence. So that's hard for her. But she said that doing the 48 Hours interview was a cathartic experience for her. And she truly believes that there are more victims of Clayton, if not murder, but definitely sexual assaults, because we'll get into it, but there were several. And she says that she hopes that by her coming forward, it gives anybody else that he may have hurt over the years that he's been alive the courage to do the same thing. And, you know, it's not just her who thinks this. The police working the case also think that Clayton has more victims that either haven't come forward or aren't alive. And dude, imagine how Diana's family felt. They hadn't wanted her to marry him. They had seen red flags in him, but they had accepted him as their family, right? Like, was he a great husband? No, she did end up leaving him, but he was around, dude. He was at Easter and Christmas and family gatherings, and he was never seen as being violent to her ever. She never said he was violent to her at all. So to know him that intimately and then learn that he had done this all those years before, it was just a huge shock. So anyways, in April of 2021, 26 years after Catherine was murdered, the detective and the Texas Ranger, that had been working the case, fly to Ohio, and they sit down with a now much older Clayton Foreman. Now, when they met with him, he had no idea what he was there for. He had actually come in voluntarily because they had lied to him. Because remember, he's an Uber driver. They said that like somebody who had taken his Uber had left her purse in his car. They were able to convince him to come. So he's sitting across from them when they tell him that they are from Texas. And I can only imagine that like his whole body, his little butt tightened up at that moment. Because like, if you knew you did something like this and now police from Texas are sitting across from you after lying to get you in a room, you know you're fucked, bro. But you know, they said he acted pretty chill. They sat down with him. They told him why they were there, that they were there investigating the murder of Mary Catherine Edwards, and that in going through her case file, they found a wedding photo from his wedding, and they were like, okay, you guys know each other. You were never really looked into. So now we're here. And he's like, yeah, I did know her, but I didn't even know she was dead. Which we know was an absolute lie. And we know this because remember, police had talked to Diana, and Diana had told them that when Catherine was killed, even though she and Clayton weren't together anymore, she had contacted him to talk to him about the grief that she was experiencing. She had called him in hysterics and told him that Catherine had been murdered, and remembered in hindsight that his reaction had been weird. He had just kind of been like, oh, really? But didn't seem fazed or shocked or surprised at all. But at the time, she didn't really let it sink into her because she was distraught over losing her friend. And, you know, everybody just grieves differently. Anyways, he says that he knows the twins, but he didn't really know the twins. He just knew the twins because they were friends with Diana. He said they were a couple of years younger than him, so they didn't really socialize together, and said that he had never been alone with Catherine, which was very important. He said he had never been to her home. He had never gone to college with her. He had never dated her, never kissed her, and definitely never had sex with her. And there's a reason they're getting him to answer all these questions, right? They're getting him to admit now that he has no reason why his DNA should be on her person, right? But the thing is, they know they have his DNA. So they're letting him dig his hole and deny, so that when they finally tell him like, hey, we have your semen, bro. He can't be like, well, of course my semen was there. She was my girlfriend. I was her boyfriend. It was a secret. Because he's already said that that wasn't the case. So once he denies having any contact with Catherine in like years, he's like, I haven't seen that woman in forever. They're like, okay, cool. Then why is your DNA inside a dead woman and on her bed? How'd it get there? And he says he has no idea how it would have got there. And they tell him, listen, there's only one way it could have gotten there. That's if you put it there. That's if you put your DNA inside her and on her bedspread at the time she was killed. That's the only way it would have gotten there. And that's the moment when he stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. So he thinks he's free to leave. They all get up. They start walking down the hallway. He thinks he's going home. But then, Shyamalan twist, they arrest his ass. And these detectives, this Texas Ranger, they were doing the most, because at the time of the arrest, they already knew they were going to arrest him. So they had spoken to the DA, and they got permission to use the handcuffs that had been used on Catherine at the time she was murdered. They got permission from the DA to take these handcuffs and have those be the ones they put on Clayton at the time he is arrested. They said that they saw this as like a symbolic thing, them taking them off of Catherine and putting them on her killer. And they said specifically of this decision, and I quote, "It's a moment I'll never forget. You feel like you got to do something for Catherine there. You know, like physically got to do for her, is take those cuffs that bound her when she was murdered and put them back on the guy that murdered her. It may seem small to some, but it was a really big deal to us, and it felt good." And also, now people can talk about it like I am right now. That's what it felt like to me, at least, but I don't know. Who am I to say? Now, what's super sad here is by the time an arrest was finally made in this case and the case went to trial, Catherine's mother, father, and brother had all passed away. So they never got to know what happened to her. The only family member that was alive to get these answers was Allison, the answers that the rest of her family died waiting for. So the trial began in 2024, and Clayton Foreman was pleading not guilty. Now, the prosecution felt like they had a very strong case and were pretty confident they were going to get a conviction. And the defense seemed to know this because they were very defensive. The defense was defensive. Great. For example, after calling 0 witnesses, that's right, 0 witnesses, he instead tried to present other suspects, other people, other theories of other people who could have done this. Like, for example, Catherine's ex-boyfriend, David, who he says was excluded by police far too early, even though you may recall he was ruled out by DNA, as were several other men, all ruled out by DNA, but not Clayton. Clayton was a match. He then also tried to bring up other men and Catherine's frequent time spent at nightclubs, but her own sister said that Catherine may have gone with friends sporadically to clubs in college, but that once they graduated and when she had a job and once she was like an adult, she was no longer doing that, so it was all fairly pointless to bring up. Like her college days, yeah, she went to clubs, but now she was a teacher and an adult, and that wasn't her life. She was just like walking her dog and going to church. He did also try to get Clayton's interview with police because it was recorded. I watched the recording. They tried to get that thrown out of the trial in addition to all the DNA evidence that was retrieved from his trash, which if that had been successful, that would have been so bad because of the fruit of the poisonous tree and all that jazz. If you know, you know. Well, if you don't know. If he was able to get the DNA thrown out from the trash, any evidence that they got because of that wouldn't be able to be used. So they couldn't use the DNA. So then I wonder if they could have even had him arrested, since the reason he was arrested was because his DNA was a match. But it didn't end up mattering anyway because of the fact that the judge denied them both. But there's a case, I have to try to figure out what the name of it is. I learned about it in college where basically, no, this was a Miranda case. Not fruit of the poisonous tree. But I guess it's still sort of fruit of the poisonous tree because they arrested this guy and the cops questioned him without a lawyer present. And he admitted to the location of the body. I believe it was of a little girl. And then because he wasn't Mirandized, that confession was thrown out. So even though they literally found the body based on his confession, them finding the body was thrown out. So they had to find different evidence against him because of the fruit of the poisonous tree. But I can't remember what case that is. If you know, let me know in the comments below because I can't remember. But now I'm curious and I feel like I want to cover it. But moving on. So the prosecution had all the things that I already mentioned, but they also had the ability to appeal to the humanity of everyone in that courtroom. For example, either one of the very first people or the very first person that they had put on the stand to question was the dispatcher who took the 911 call from Marianne at the time she found her daughter's body. And at the time that she was being questioned, they actually played the 911 call. So the courtroom and the jury heard Marianne scream to this dispatcher, quote, "My daughter has been murdered. We found her. She's handcuffed and has been tortured. Don't ask me to go through this over the phone. I think they drowned her." And when the jury heard this, several of the jurors began to cry. The prosecution also put Catherine's twin sister Allison on the stand, and it gave them a way to actually physically show the jury how Catherine would look if she was still alive. And she talked about the day she learned her sister was killed and basically cried the whole time. It was very clear that the pain of losing her sister was still very real and raw to her. And it was clear that she really did love her sister because years after she was killed, she had a daughter that she named Catherine, a niece that Catherine never got to meet. And she says that that is the hardest part. And then there was the last day of trial, and this is when things really ramped up because the prosecution hammered home what a piece of shit Clayton was by putting woman after woman on the stand to talk about their experiences with him. They had a woman named Teresa testify, and Teresa had actually been Clayton's fiance at the time he was arrested. And she testified and told the court that when she and Clayton were just dating, she had found photos of girls in his possession. And she said that when she questioned him about these, first he said that these photos belonged to his friend's kid, but eventually confessed to her that they belonged to him and that he had kept them because he liked to fantasize about taking their virginities. Now, why did she stay with him after that? I really cannot say, but that wasn't the only bit of information she was able to give the court. She was also able to tell them that Clayton had a strange fascination with Beaumont. Would it make sense that he looked into Beaumont? Yes, because he had lived there, but homeboy literally would go on the computer every morning and look up the Beaumont news, and every night. Twice a day, he was looking up news for an area that he did not live in, and she found that to be weird. Oh, and speaking of things that she thought were weird, right? Something that was weird when it happened, but is even weirder in hindsight, is that at one point Clayton had completely and vehemently, aggressively refused to give his DNA to National Geographic when they were doing some sort of work on Neanderthals. And she said specifically of this quote, he said he wasn't interested. He didn't want people to have his personal information. That's how they find you. And she said it was odd because he was so opposed to it that it became an argument that lasted quite a while. So that was his fiance, but they also had his ex-wife Diana testify against him. Diana, we've talked about her quite a bit, and she was very helpful because she told the court what she had told the cops. And that was that Clayton had a fascination with police officers and authority in general, and even owned a billy club that he kept beside their bed. She also said that at one point she had found a briefcase in his possession that had a gun, handcuffs, and porn inside, and she knew that he owned a pair of handcuffs like the ones that were used in Catherine's murder that he had kept on the rearview mirror of his car. She also told the court that when she had first met Clayton when they were in school, she knew that he, Clayton, thought Catherine was cute, thought the twins were cute, liked that they were twins. And she was able to tell the court that though Clayton told them that he hadn't seen Catherine in years, she knew that wasn't true because Catherine actually taught at the school where their son went. Okay? And sometimes Clayton would have to go to the school, so it was very likely that he could have seen Catherine. Testifying in court was very hard for Diana. It was hard for her to sit there and listen and hear that she had been married to just a monster of a man. And it was particularly hard for her when she heard the testimony from the woman who Clayton had been arrested for assaulting before they had even gotten married. The one that he convinced Diana was a misunderstanding. This woman was the final witness at his trial, and she told the court about what happened to her at the hands of Clayton. She said the night that he assaulted her, her car had broken down on the side of the road in the rain, and that Clayton came upon her and got out of the car with a pair of handcuffs pretending to be a cop. Clayton took her. He bound her hands behind her back and held a knife to her throat to make sure that she complied, telling her he would kill her if she didn't. And then he assaulted her. And she said that this went on for quite some time before finally he took her home and said that he was sorry not to cry and he hopes he didn't hurt her. Now, at first, she didn't go to the police, but she told a friend what happened and eventually ended up going to the cops, and Clayton was arrested and he was convicted of this. But instead of being convicted of rape, he was convicted of aggravated assault, I believe, and given 3 years of deferred adjudication, which essentially just means the probation thing. So he didn't serve time, which, is so infuriating for a number of reasons. And then you look at it and you compare it to what happened to Catherine. The use of police tools, the binding the hands behind the back, the sexual assault. After hearing these details from this woman and a similar story from a woman who didn't come to court but gave a written testimony that was presented at trial, the prosecution said that this method of assault was his signature. It's just horrific. It's horrific that this woman had to go through that. It was horrific for Diana to hear it. She said this was the worst thing she had ever heard anyone talk about going through. She had never heard of anything like that, and said that this woman was so incredibly brave and selfless to get on the stand and tell everyone what this man that she had married did to her. Now, though the defense didn't present much, they did give a closing argument. They said that, in court they had heard a lot of information, a lot of stories about sexual deviances, but nothing that they had presented had proven that Clayton Foreman was a murderer. He said, you might not like him based on everything the prosecution has presented. You might not think he's a good guy, but the prosecution has not proven murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Which, I don't know. I think the DNA kind of proves that, but go off, defends king. Now, the prosecution closed by saying that as a human being, it's natural to not want to believe that evil like this exists in the world, but it does. And it was in the courtroom with them that day. The prosecution added that there are details that he learned about this case that he wished that he never had to know. He wished the jury never had to know it, but said that it was not his fault that everyone in that courtroom was now scarred. It was Clayton's. The prosecution then reminded the jury that they, the jury, were the voices for Catherine, for her friends, for her family, for justice for her that they had waited nearly 30 years to get, and asked them to come back with the only verdict that was appropriate. Guilty. The jury was then sent to deliberate, and after less than an hour of deliberations, they had come back with their decision. They had found Clayton Foreman guilty of all the charges against him, and he was sentenced to life in prison. I don't think the death penalty was even on the table, but even so, the DA said of this decision, this verdict, quote, "We think a life sentence without the opportunity of parole is a much more severe punishment. That man has to live and think about every single event that has occurred in his life. That is going to be on his mind until the day he dies. That is a much greater punishment than to just be put to sleep and never have a traumatic moment about it." Which I think can be true if the person sitting in jail gives a shit, but I don't think that a person who can do to a person what this man, Clayton, did to Catherine, can possibly give a shit. You know what I mean? Like, does he feel guilty? I'm not convinced. This is a man that was able to hide a serious darkness that was inside of him for such a long time. And he hid it well. Most people who knew him were shocked to hear he could do something like this, even given his history, because they didn't know about it. They could not believe that he could possibly do something like this because he was such a nice guy. Nice guy. Okay. But anyways, he got life in prison, and he will have the opportunity of parole in 2061 when he is 101 years old. So I'm glad to hear that he will be in jail for the rest of his life. But we have to remember, he got to live as a free man for 26 years. He got to have a life. He got to get married. He got to have kids. He got to exist. These are all things that Catherine was robbed of the day he murdered her. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Mary Catherine Edwards. I hope that you found it to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Catherine with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you think that Clayton Foreman is responsible for any additional murders? Or do you think it's possible that he committed this one horrific murder and then went on to not do anything else the rest of his life? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because I'm curious to hear what you think. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you may or may not know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on the list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great tastes, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And if you don't know, now you know, this is also a podcast. This that you're watching, you can also listen to it. Just so you know, you would just search True Crime with Bratterstein on any of the areas, any of the places where you listen to podcasts. If you want to do that, that's cool. If you want to leave a review or whatever you do when it's a podcast, that'd be great to help me get into the algorithm. But if not, I just want to thank you for being here. And with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.